Thank you so much, Rashina. What a beautiful introduction. I'm so grateful to be here today. So, thank you to the Alchemist Kitchen and to all of you for showing up and being here on this springy but freezing up here in the Northeast Monday afternoon, right after daylight savings time. So, hopefully, that didn't throw anyone off. I'm just reveling in the excitement of being able to wear lipstick without a mask for y'all. So, really excited, and the daffodils are behind me, blessing our space. So, I wanted to get started with a grounding exercise. I know that always helps me when I'm about to teach or share, connect, and I hope it all helps all of you as well to be present and learn together. So, if you'd like to just close down your eyes or turn off your camera if you're more comfortable, we're just going to do a quick body scan, starting at the top of the head. I'm going to close my eyes, but if you prefer to just gaze softly in front of you and you feel more comfortable with your eyes open, that's perfectly fine as well. So, just starting at the top of the head, noticing the sensations there, just bringing awareness to your scalp, your ears, going down the back of the neck, the jaw. Anywhere that you find tension, just pausing to breathe into it a little bit. Taking an extra moment there. Breathing deeply all the way into your stomach. Feeling the breath on your nostrils. And moving down now from the shoulders to the middle of the back, the front of the chest, the stomach, the hips. Now you might find yourself seated somewhere, so feeling the seat rising up to meet you, really leaning into that support and noticing the support beneath you, and letting your awareness continue to glide down your legs, your knees, and releasing tension there as you find it. Again, just breathing in to any spots that may be holding tension today. Maybe we've been sitting at our computers all day working, on a million other Zoom meetings. So just finding a moment to be in our bodies with whatever's coming up there, whatever sensations are there. Now down from the knees, we're going to continue on to our calves, then our ankles, and finally our feet. Feeling the feet on the ground, really getting into that sense of groundedness that the actual earth beneath our feet can offer us. So it might be a wooden floor, it might be a carpet, feeling the texture of your shoes or your slippers or socks, whatever you might have on, feeling the temperature there. And for an extra bit of groundedness, I like to imagine roots reaching up to entangle my feet, kind of clasping as if a friend might be clasping your hand, intertwining your toes with the roots of this particular tree. Could be a tree that you have a special relationship with, or a tree that you know out your window, or just any unknown plant that could be reaching out to you at this time and feeling that groundedness. So now that we're grounded, can start to listen to the sounds in your space. It could be the sound of my voice. There could be other sounds in the background as well. Using those to orient yourself in your space and slowly fluttering open your eyes. If you're ready to do so, you're welcome to turn your camera back on. Hopefully we're all feeling a little bit more grounded. I also welcome you to grab a notebook, water, anything that snack, anything that might help you to engage with this material. And for those of you that are watching the recording later in the future, I should say, welcome as well. So we're going to kind of create a connected space between those in the ether connecting later and those connecting through the Zoom portal at this particular moment. So I'm going to share my screen now so that you all can see the presentation that I made for you. So just one moment while I figure that out. Okay. Okay. So hopefully you're all seeing that. Herbal Allies for Sobriety. Yes, Rashina? Awesome. So I just made a note there that everything in this class is for educational purposes. I'm not a doctor. I'm also not an addiction specialist. So keeping that in mind, you should always check with your doctor before you quit drinking and before you try new herbs or supplements. So just a little disclaimer there. And this is my intro page. So hello, everyone. I know you got a little intro from Rashina at the beginning about who I am. And here's a little further information so we can get to know each other. My name's Ana. I put like sauna there for those of you that may be tempted to call me Anna. It's just an easy way I've learned to remind people. And I use she, her pronouns. So my lineage is mostly European, British, Polish, and Jewish. And I've been learning more about herbs from those different places. So I sometimes do try to weave that knowledge in. It's definitely a long practice and journey that I'm on. So I am an herbalist. I studied at ArborVitae School of Traditional Herbalism, which is here in New York City. So I'm coming to you from Lenape and Canarsie land, which is also known as Brooklyn. And I run a small business called Eye Herbals. So right now I'm branching that out into sober spirals, which is why you're all here today, which is holistic sobriety coaching, as well as workshops and blog and other things to come, possibly herbal medicines as well. So I'm also a recovery coach. I work with Tempest and in private practice, helping people to address their relationship with alcohol. I completed Jolene Park's gray area drinking program, and I do also identify as a gray area drinker myself. That's kind of how I came to this work, was through my experience of just realizing moderation didn't work for me and there was no benefit to keeping alcohol in my life. And that was definitely not something that happened overnight. It was a long process and a long story, which we won't get totally into today. But needless to say, in 2018, that's when I became sober permanently, or at least as far as I can see for myself. And before that, it was more of an on and off sort of a thing where I wasn't sure if I would continue drinking or not. So just to talk a little bit about, that's my introduction. I also invite you all to introduce each other in the chat. I probably won't be able to see it right now the way this is set up, but please, if you're on the call currently, you could introduce yourself with your name, your pronoun, where you're at on your sobriety journey if you like, and what land you're coming from or your location. So a big welcome to all of you, no matter where you're at in your journey. This is definitely not a class that's just for people who are sober, could be for people who are just curious about the idea of sobriety, or those who are here just to learn for education, to support their clients or support their friends through the experience of sobriety. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the connection between nature and sobriety to me. So how I came to tying herbalism and sobriety together. So I believe our healing is intrinsically tied to the healing of others. We don't heal in a vacuum, right? And that nature is a big part of that for me. So healing our planet is a big part of how I see healing ourselves and healing each other. So for me, the process of getting sober allowed me to understand why and how I was using alcohol to regulate my nervous system, and then find healthier ways to do so. So that wasn't necessarily something I had to do only to get sober, but it was something that through the experience of getting sober, I learned. So it's a process. In my experience, an alcohol-free life can facilitate healing of underlying issues. So when we stop numbing and escaping, we have the opportunity to heal things that are going on underneath. It can also help to teach us to sit with discomfort. So personally, I was not comfortable sitting with discomfort. And it's not that I'm comfortable with it now, but I'm comfortable with the fact that there is more discomfort. So more tolerant of it, I would say, and just accepting that that's a normal part of life, right? So through sobriety, I was also able to reconnect with myself, which is something I've seen for a lot of clients as well, to show up for ourselves, feel into our own body, living a more embodied life and feeling what our own needs are. So something as simple as not really even knowing when I was hungry. That was a sign to myself that I wasn't fully in touch with my body on a daily basis. And the experience of removing alcohol from my life and everything I had to do to remove alcohol in my life allowed me to step into my body a little more and realize, okay, I do have all of these very basic human needs that I could be pushing to the side. So I also think it's so important that once we remove alcohol, and through the process of removing alcohol, we also tune into our intuition and our own humanity, because the world is a lot, right? And it's just, there's so much loss and grief and scary things going on that it totally makes sense that we put up this wall. And we do that in so many other ways, but alcohol is one of them that we kind of seek to protect ourselves sometimes. So without that protection, I felt very raw, very vulnerable, but at the same time was able to feel and hear my intuition and feel the pain of others, have that the reality that I was an empath, for example, came to the surface. And I think a lot of people have that experience in sobriety too. So finding ways to protect your energy is really important for those people, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So plants were a huge part of reconnecting to the physical body, in part because of how when we interact with plants, we're using all 5 of our senses. So they can make us feel very alive. So, and also because there's just connection there. Plants can be our friends. So I found plants at a time when I was really lonely, and I just started spending a lot of time in the park and spending, actually starting to really enjoy solitude. And I realized it's because I'm not really alone. I was with these trees and I was with these plants, and I was actually building relationships with them. And I felt it connected me to something I knew, something from long, long ago, some thread that hadn't really been touched lately. And I realized that was some part of my true essence from my youth, because I played in the woods as a kid, maybe even some ancestral connection that I was feeling with, my great grandmother was an herbalist, and and everyone used plants, right, in all of our lineages. So maybe some connection to those ancestors that were using plants. I started to feel that there was this thread of aliveness. So I just kept following that. And I found joy through these reciprocal relationships with plants. So giving gratitude and interacting with the plants as if they were alive and had spirits, because I believe they are. And also just the fact, I just threw in there at the end, stress reducing. Yeah, spending time in nature is really stress reducing. And I went into that in my blog, which might be how some of you found me here today, but it will also be in the resources. So forest bathing, you may have heard of this Japanese practice of spending time just in the woods for no reason other than to just enjoy the woods and wander and relax. So this practice called forest bathing actually reduces cortisol levels, which is one of the stress hormones in our body. So there is actually a lot of scientific evidence that spending time in nature reduces stress and is calming to the nervous system. And my personal experience shows that as well. And I have a couple of pictures here just to really just draw the connection between, there's that little girl self of me over on the left out in the woods, I think just playing with an oak leaf maybe. And then here's me on the right in Prospect Park, probably this spring, recently. So feeling the connection between my younger self. So yeah, now we're going to get into the nitty gritty of it a little bit, which is how we can use herbs to support sobriety and how can we ritualize their use a little bit. So some of you may be using herbs all the time. I don't know how familiar all of you are with herbalism. So there's going to be some intro parts in here, and then we'll get a little bit more into depth later. So creating habits. Habits are created, good ones or bad ones, through these neural pathways, because what wires together fires together. So if we do things in a certain setting, like drink on a patio, patios may forever make us think of drinking, right? I think we're all familiar with this reality. So we can also use the way that habits are built to unbuild them or to build new ones. And that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit today. So as Mark Lewis says in his book, Biology of Desire, what wires apart fires apart as well. So both of these are true. So what we're trying to do here is create new habits that can help to replace the habit of drinking. And we can use some of the old cues that we used to use for drinking for creating these new healthier habits. And then I'm picturing like an old small road in Vermont that's just covered in snow and it's not getting plowed anymore, right? So that neural pathway maybe used to get plowed really regularly, and then it was easy to go down that road, but it's just going to become harder to go down that road because we're going to be creating other roads and keeping those roads maintained and plowed. So the first step is noticing the cue or the trigger for drinking. We're going to be talking specifically about drinking here. This could be used for many different types of addictions or habits, right? But notice the cue or the trigger, the associations or the emotion that comes up prior to when you notice you take the action of drinking. So some of you may be deeper along on your journey and be very aware of what all your triggers are. And then some of you this might be the first time you've even really considered it, right? So just to acknowledge that there's people from all different points on this journey, and all of that is great. So once you've noticed a cue or a trigger, you don't have to think of all of them, just choosing one to work with. One where you want to maybe choose a different action instead of drinking. You're going to choose a new action, and it could be one of these herbs, could be something else, and then ritualize it. And I think a way to think about ritualizing it is adding intention. Rather than it being just a rote act that you take, you add intention and you really sit with the experience and you let it sink into all five senses. So the third part of this is to notice the reward, because we go normally from the cue or the trigger to taking the action of drinking to then getting the reward or supposed reward or perceived reward. Even the idea of a reward can be a reward in the body. So the third step would be to slow down and notice the physical, spiritual, or emotional benefit or sensation that you get from taking the action that you did. So let's say that you burned, some rosemary leaf after a stressful meeting. You were on Zoom all day, feeling all tense, and you felt that could be a cue or a trigger, right? Feeling tense after a meeting. So you're pausing, you're noticing that cue or the trigger, and then you're taking the action to go get some rosemary leaf and burn that, and to then take in the reward, which is the smell of the rosemary, the clear energy in the air, the sense of calm or centeredness, right? Theoretically, if you feel those things. If you don't, that might not be the tool for you, right? Not everything works for everyone. So this right here is the opportunity to infuse your recovery with herbal support. You may be doing some of these things that I just mentioned, but using something else, a different action there. And that's great too. No need to change something if it's working for you. But there's probably always a new cues that you could retrain to incorporate herbs that have maybe been overlooked. So to work in a reciprocal way with herbs, I always recommend to ask for the herb's help, speak with the spirit of the plant, offer the plant gratitude, and even gifts. If it's a plant that, grows in your yard, for example, or in your garden, going out there and giving it little something. Sometimes I offer herbs, flower essences, or pieces of crystals, just anything that you value that's safe to leave in the land. So we're going to talk quickly about different kinds of herbal preparations as well. So some of you, again, may be very experienced with herbs, and we'll go quickly over this. But for those of you that, maybe have never even made a tea before or worked with a tincture, what are they? This can be a little bit intimidating if you don't even know where to start, right? So teas are my absolute favorite. This is what I always recommend people go to if they like teas, because I think they're very affordable, easy to prepare, and they're tasty for the most part. If they're not going to be tasty with that herb, then I tend to recommend an extract instead. I have a short description of how to prepare a medicinal tea there. The most important thing is to steep them longer than you think and to steep them covered. This holds in all of the essential oils, and it's just important to make it stronger than you might with a typical tea bag. That's usually not quite enough herbal material, or the herbs aren't as fresh. So if you're using tea bags, sometimes I'll use 2 or steep it a little longer, at least 10 minutes, even overnight. So liquid extracts, there's a picture here on the right of one that I made. So liquid extracts can be many different things. The ones that are most common are tinctures, and these do contain alcohol. So I just always give that caveat. Some people will be comfortable working with tinctures that contain alcohol and some won't. So that's a really personal decision. I don't think there's anything, a right or wrong way to do that. I personally associate tinctures with healing and with medicine because I was using them for so long. And for some people, they may taste that and it may trigger them to think of alcohol in the way that they used to drink. So do be very mindful of that. Always let people know if you're offering them a tincture that does have alcohol in it for that reason. So a couple really good alternatives are Glycerites. So glycerites have a little bit of a sweet flavor to them, which make them really delicious. And they're made from plant materials. So they're vegan, vegetarian, alcohol free. Um, and that they taste really good with like rose or lemon balm, lavender. Oxymels are another type of liquid extract that do not contain alcohol. So they contain honey and vinegar. So it's got a little of that sweet and little tart sourness to them. So I think those are delicious, and I make a lot of those myself. Those are easy to make at home too. So if you have dried herb or even fresh herb plant material and you want to just mix it with some vinegar and honey, you can do that the Folk method, which means basically don't even bother measuring it. And I usually just put about half honey, half vinegar and to cover, and then let that steep for 2 to 3 weeks, if not a little longer. But you can also look up recipes for that online. It's quite easy. The great thing about extracts is that they're portable, right? So you can take them wherever you're going. They're also great for bitter or strong tasting herbs because you don't have to take a lot of the herbs. So you're not like drinking a whole tea of something that doesn't taste good to you. You can just take that small amount and dilute it in water if it's one that doesn't taste good. Aromatherapy is another favorite, especially for these herbal toolkits you might be building to support your sobriety. So this is discussing essential oils. These are made from the strongest part of the plant. So they're very strong topically. Even I would dilute them internally. They're pretty much too strong to use internally. Some people do that, but I don't recommend it. They also use a lot of plant material. So they're not quite as sustainable and they are more expensive, but they can shift your mood really quickly. So I do recommend using them in moderation, using them in small amounts, because as a scent, they're just so much stronger than a lot of other things. So putting just a couple drops in your hand for anxiety or panic, for example, and then smelling it like that can be really, really helpful. So let's see. Probably my favorite, however, is this next one here, herbs as amulets or smoke. So this is a more energetic way of using plants. So you can carry an herb in your pocket. Maybe you have a plant in your backyard that you have a relationship with. You can take a little bit of that and carry it with you. Or you can make little pillows or little jars filled with herbs. And these can be, something you infuse intention into and carry with you. Or you can make smoke wands and use those to clear the air, or again, to infuse the air with intention. And I would consider these all pretty low cost to free in some cases, which is also awesome. So flower essences are another liquid medicine. These are usually preserved with a little brandy. So I do want to mention that. If you use them, however, you're only taking 1, 2, 3 drops, very, very small amount. So and the amount of brandy in the whole thing is very small to begin with. So again, that depends on if the flavor may be a trigger to you. They also make vinegar-based flower essences, so keep a lookout for those. Or if you make them yourself, you may want to try making them with vinegar. They don't last quite as long, but they are still very, they're pretty stable as well. The thing about flower essences that's great is that they're very safe. So they're safe for pregnancy because they're such subtle medicine. They don't really have any of the constituents of the plant in them. What they have is the energetic footprint, the energetic information from the plant. So they again work in the similar way as the herbs as amulets or smoke work on that subtle, more spiritual, emotional realm or states. So the last category that we're going to talk about today is mists or hydrosols. So hydrosols are one of the byproduct of essential oils. So it's essentially the condensation that comes off in the still. So it's another way that you can use aromatherapy. You could also use just water with a little bit of essential oil diluted in it, or a tea that you put into a spray bottle. So there's lots of different ways that you can create a spray and just spray the air or spray your face. It can be a topical, and they're not necessarily used for internal medicine. So this can also be great if you're not wanting to take anything internally, but you're wanting to infuse your life with more herbs and keep it simple that way. These are some these are hydrocells here from Rooted Things. My friend Maya makes these. I think there's only 1 or 2 on her website right now, but she does often make some really nice handmade hydrocells. So I put the link in the resources at the end. I have a few pictures here just of some energetic medicine. These are amulets on the left-hand side. These are 2 jars filled with herbs. So there's some rose, chamomile. These were ones with the intention for healing trauma, if I'm not mistaken, that I made a couple of years ago. And then up in the top right-hand corner, we have some smoke wands that I made from herbs just in my backyard. So just know you can buy some of these things, but you can also make them yourself very easily. I used some plantain and some ginkgo and some rosemary that I grew. Down on the bottom left corner is a amulet that my great grandmother made quite a while ago with a bunch of different herbs in it for traveling. So I thought that was really interesting when I found it, because I'd also gotten interested in making amulets already, and it just shows that you can use them for really all kinds of different things. They're used a lot for protection and for specific intentions, but I can see how they would be very supportive around sobriety with your specific goals and intentions around sobriety. You could make an amulet that was, for your goal of staying sober for 30 days, for example, or whatever it might be. And I just think it's a kind of fun and interesting way to work with herbs. So specifically for this class, we're trying to come up with really practical tools to support your sobriety. So these are some things that I do with clients that helps them to either stay sober or get sober or address their relationship with alcohol. So I wanted to share some of those with you. So the first thing to do is to name your goal. It could be a really small goal, or it could be a huge goal, a goal for the whole year or a goal for your life. And then write it down. So you don't necessarily have to share it with anyone. It could be totally private, but if you'd like, you can share it with someone you trust. You're welcome to share a goal you're working on in the chat too, if you all want to have a conversation with that. Pause for tea. The other thing is to identify your why. So a goal, without motivation behind it is going to be a lot harder to sustain. So I always recommend people really delve into why they're doing this. And usually people know why they're doing it, right? Like, that your relationship with alcohol isn't working for you, but what specifically would you gain? What would your life look like 30 days from now or 60 days from now if you achieved this goal that you're setting for yourself? And really think about what those new positives are, not just what you're taking out of your life, but what are you bringing in? And write that down as well for motivation to keep yourself really clear on your why. So the key, as we mentioned earlier, is to identify the triggers and understand the deeper reasons why you drink, and to nourish the parts of yourself that need it. That's a simple sentence that's talking about something really, really huge, as I'm sure many of you know. So this could involve therapy, it could involve working with a doctor, it could involve so many different things that may need to happen for you to feel nourished. But so to create new habits in the way that we're talking about in this class, and to make it a little bit more what's something you can do on an everyday basis, right? So the big picture can seem overwhelming, but small picture, it's what you do every single day that matters the most, even these really small things. So using the habits that, we're using the neuroplasticity of our brain, which, that's how we learned to drink to begin with, right? Because we're really good at learning and our brains are built to learn. So we're going to use that same neuroplasticity to create these new habits. So we're going to be looking at the cue, the action, and the reward, and letting the reward sink in with all 5 senses. So I thought specifically today it would be interesting to look at some specific triggers, some specific common reasons why people drink. There are so many, and it's very unique to the individual. So just, be aware we're not going to discuss all of them, but hopefully some of these will give you some ideas, some jumping off points. As we talk about herbs as well, notice just which ones resonate with you. Which ones did you think, oh, I want to try that? Write those down, look into them a little more later. We won't have time to do a full materia medica into each of the herbs that I mentioned. So write them down and do a little more research on those ones that you're curious about. So looking at the first one we're going to talk about, is stress and anxiety. This is the one trigger that I hear the most often, and it is probably the biggest one that I experienced myself. So really having a lot of anxiety and not having the skills to cope with it, since I was a kid, caused me to realize how quickly I could relax with alcohol. And yes, in the long term, alcohol makes anxiety much worse. In the very, very short term, there can be some relief because of what it does to GABA levels in part. and the sedative qualities. And again, well, we'll put that aside for now. But what I mentioned here is just some things to think about before even getting to herbs, because I think herbs work really well in combination with other things, but not necessarily all on their own. So looking at the underlying neurotransmitter depletion is where you might want to start. The work of Julia Ross, she's someone who worked with people dealing with addiction, specifically alcoholism and other addictions, and found that there was common neurotransmitter depletion, such as serotonin and GABA specifically, but there's also other ones to look into. And that's linked in the resources as well. And you may want to work with supplements and look at the foods as well that support those, so you're getting the nutrition that may help as well. So the other thing to consider is just managing your energy. This is something I personally did not, I didn't learn this in school. My parents didn't teach me this. It wasn't in home ec, but just the reality that we go through the day getting wound up. And then at the end of the day, we're expected to just, okay, now it's time to relax, but your body doesn't know how to go from point A to point B like that. It's just too much. So creating breaks throughout the day and techniques throughout the day so that you're managing your energy and you don't come into the witching hour totally fried. So I'm referring to that witching hour can be a different time for every person. But this point in the day when, you're just feeling really stressed out and all bets are off because you maybe didn't take care of your energy the way that you meant to. So the witching hour could be that 5 o'clock period when you're done with work, or it could be when you're starting to cook dinner. If there's a specific time of day that you notice your cravings coming on, it could be referred to that way. So breath work is one way that you can definitely shift your mood and deal with stress and anxiety really quickly. I'm not going to go into all the benefits of meditation and breath work. I think we've all heard that a million times and we know, but the one that quick and easy thing that helped me a lot was just the 4-7-8 breath. So I like to just touch on that. You breathe in for 4, hold for 7, and then breathe out through the mouth for 8. So it's in through the nose for 4, holding for 7, and then out through the mouth for 8. And doing this 1 to 5 times while seated or standing, not in movement, can really be a game changer for shifting the energy. So now that we've talked about just the basic background, things you might want to consider with stress and anxiety, the herbs that I love are going to be the Nervines. So Nervines are a category of herb that work on the nervous system to help release stress and anxiety and help your body adjust to stress as well. So these are just some of my favorite Nervines. When alcohol is a problem, I find that these herbs can help. And again, you never are matching the herb to the pathology. In herbalism, you're always matching the herb to the person and the herb to the constitution of the person. So it's really about matching 2 personalities. And that's what that more holistic ideology of herbalism is really all about. So some herbs that I love, skullcap is amazing for when you have that repetitive, anxious monkey mind kind of thoughts, especially at night, if you tend to ruminate, be caught on a hamster wheel. Skullcap can be really relaxing. It's also specifically paired a lot with Milky Oats for patterns of addiction, those 2 Nervines together. Kava is another one that I recommend a lot for social anxiety and for the type of anxiety where you're holding a lot of tension in your body and you're feeling it in your muscles, because it's a relaxant as well. So this one I personally have as a tea right now. I think it's tasty as a tea. I recommend it a lot with macadamia nut milk and honey if you want to make it into a little treat. That's delicious. Lavender, as we mentioned, as aromatherapy would be a lovely way to use lavender. Can be a little soapy as a tea, but that's definitely another way to use it. Lemon balm is a lovely as a tea herb, and it's great for the stomach and the mind. So it's calming when you get those kind of butterflies and you tend to feel anxiety in your stomach, and when you tend to have a hard time focusing. It's another great herb as well. Motherwort, very bitter, so I don't recommend this one as a tea, but as a flower essence maybe would be perfect. Can be helpful for learning to mother yourself and learning to nurture yourself, which is something, a lot of us didn't really do until we got sober, until we started addressing our relationship with alcohol. So motherwort can be a great ally for that more energetic support, I find. Rose, Definitely one of my all-time favorite herbs. So the petals for self-compassion, especially. So we think of rose for love, but it's often overlooked that it's really self-love. I think that it really excels at. And it would be really nice paired with the lemon balm, maybe a little bit of lavender, skullcap. You could definitely make a tea from those herbs. That would be really nice. Rose is also really tasty as a glycerite. And that's one you could just carry around in your pocket or have in your toolkit for moments of craving. The other class of herbs that's really helpful for stress and anxiety is adaptogens. So, adaptogens help your body adjust to stress and cope with stress. So, they essentially make you more resilient to stress. They are balancing to the HPA axis and they work on the adrenals. A few that are specifically indicated for when there's more high anxiety are ashwagandha. It's also helpful for sleep. Holy basil. Those are two Ayurvedic herbs. And Milky Oats. So Milky Oats, did I talk about it before? Not as much. So Milky Oats is a gentle adaptogen, but it's also a nervine. So it's definitely both. It's really delicious as a tea or as a tincture. You can find it as a glycerite as well if you're looking for an alcohol-free preparation. Definitely one of my all-time favorite herbs. It's great for creating flexibility and supporting really frazzled states. So when you tend to get frazzled nerves and feel that physical depletion, it can help to build you back up. So the other tool that I think just is so important when we're talking about stress and anxiety is letting go of perfectionism. So many of us are perfectionists and have a really hard time speaking compassionately to ourselves. So cultivating compassionate self-talk, that's an intention that may be helpful. And some herbs that might support that intention are definitely rose, blue vervain, and milky oats. So blue vervain is the only one we hadn't talked about yet. So I'll just mention it's a very bitter herb, but it works really well when you have tension in the neck or the jaw. That's a specific indication for it. You may want to use it as a flower essence or use it more energetically in drop doses because of that really strong flavor that I mentioned. But it's one of the first herbs that I took and I felt the physical effects in my body right away, even with only a few a few drops. So it kind of has a special place in my heart for that reason. So the second category we're going to talk about is, if your trigger is to, or the reason, kind of one of the underlying reasons you might drink is to escape or to numb. I think that's a reason, one of the base reasons for so many of us, but I just wanted to talk about it a little bit from a different perspective. So, just to acknowledge that we do live in a capitalist culture where our supposed worth is tied to our productivity. So, I see a lot of clients struggling to give themselves time alone, to create boundaries, and to reconnect with themselves and to relax, to even value that it is okay to relax or feel okay taking that time, feel okay taking a day off, for example. So a lot of us are more comfortable nurturing and caring for others than doing the same for ourselves. So a lot of times when we're feeling the urge to escape or numb, it's because we're in complete overwhelm, right? We're overstimulated, we're overexerted, we're burned out essentially. This could be for so many different reasons, right? It could be feelings of overwhelm from trauma, processing grief, different emotional experiences, or it could be, simply from the world we live in and the kind of media that we're exposed to all day, right? Like the news. So creating boundaries in your work life, in the way that you would work with news and social media, how you decide what to bring in, will definitely help. So I wanted to mention, of course, working with a therapist for this to help titrate emotions so you're not overwhelmed by your own emotions is really important. Um, Titrate just to mean managing the speed of processing. So you're taking off the amount that you can process in that particular moment rather than more. So you're not pushing yourself into overwhelm. This is a wild idea, asking for help. This is not one I think we're really taught to do or feel super comfortable doing either culturally. So it can be pretty radical to just start asking for help and start delegating things. If you're feeling overwhelmed, you may be doing too much. And, some of those things we don't have control over, to acknowledge that. But some we do, and noticing where we do have the agency to ask for help so that we can have the opportunity to be supported by the people around us in our community, our partner, our coworkers, and whoever might be there to support us. So in the moment though, more, those are some, broader strokes, thoughts, but in the moment when you're feeling this urge to escape or to numb and you acknowledge, yes, I may be in burnout or I may be overstimulated from the day, what can you do that isn't drinking, right? Creating a self-care nest, turning off, putting do not disturb on your phone, physically creating a nest for yourself in a bed. I'm picturing honestly making like a fort like you did when you were a kid and just bringing in everything that you need, like bringing in tea and snacks and a book and like coloring materials, whatever may just feel nice and cozy and comforting, like that you're allowed to do that for yourself. You're allowed to just say, I'm not responding to anybody today, and I'm going to, take either a self care hour or a self care day or personal day. So saying no is obviously a big part of that. And, a big part of the whole work of creating boundaries. So I also have to say before sobriety, I don't think I knew what the word boundaries meant. I think I probably would have thought of, fences that, they were using to keep horses in on a farm or something. I didn't think about interpersonal boundaries. So yeah, it's a really empowering way that you can get your energy back is when you start working on your boundaries. So I also mentioned there using distraction wisely. I think sometimes when we have this urge to numb or escape, we're using alcohol and we're trying maybe to move away from alcohol. So it might be tempting to want to scroll social media, eat a pint of ice cream, watch TV all night. And I think those are not all obviously always the healthiest choices either, but sometimes they might be healthier than the other alternative. So not giving yourself a super hard time when you have to use distraction wisely, like this might be the time that I'm going to allow myself to, scroll on the internet for 30 minutes, because if there's really that urge there and there's not the ability to do some of these other things, that distraction may still be a safer distraction than the alternative. So, not worrying about perfection, but worrying about sticking to your goal. And if your goal was sobriety for a specific period, permanently, whatever that may be, using distracted as needed as a tool that is there. So, the herb category for this one, I really wanted to talk about herbs for boundaries and protection. So, this is some of the first ways that herbs were used or documented is so often in medieval times in Jewish lineage that I've been learning about. It was so often herbs for protection, especially for those traveling, for pregnant people. Um, so it's just very interesting to me how important herbs for protection have been historically. And it makes sense because, the world is a dangerous place, but more so that, you know, nowadays we need them more than ever. And we've forgotten some of these practices, these boundaries and protection practices. And with the way technology is and globalization, we're more porous than ever. So having some energetic protection, especially as you're coming into awareness of your own sensitivity, especially if you may identify as an empath, for example, you may need to work with, it could be herbs, it could be intention, around this idea of protecting your energy. So rue is one of my favorite herbs for that. That's actually the herb that's in the top there in the photograph above where it says to escape numb. That's some rue leaves there. It's not for use in pregnancy. So just to let you know that it can be great as a flower essence for boundaries, and think of it as a very fierce protector. It's also lovely as an amulet, as I was mentioning. So same with these other herbs, yarrow, hawthorn, garlic, putting a clove of garlic in your pocket. Cloves is amazing for discernment. This is something I learned recently from Dory Midnight in her Jewish. I can't remember the name of the class right now, so sorry about that. But she has a class about herbs for protection, and salt is another one. So not an herb, but just something I've been learning about for cleansing. So a lot of these are herbs that are cleansing as well. So cleansing and protecting kind of go together. You'll often want to cleanse the space. So people think of sage, white sage a lot. So this is an herb that's used in indigenous cultures, and I'm not sure if it's at risk or if it's endangered, but it's definitely one that you have to be very careful with the sourcing. So I always recommend people having access, if you have access to other herbs such as rosemary or garden sage, Salvia officinalis, instead of white sage. You'll be doing less harm to the environment that way by using other herbs to cleanse. But in any event, using smoke to cleanse and then using something for boundaries as well, something like rue or yarrow or hawthorn or even St. John's wort can pair well together. Oh, I wanted to read from something from the Dirt Gems Plant Ally deck for you all, because I loved what they say about yarrow. So I'm not sure if you can see this because it's probably very tiny right now, but this is a deck from Anne Burdett and Chelsea Granger. So the card yarrow, similar to a tarot deck they have here. I'll just quickly read that because I love what they said about it. Yarrow, the edge walker. Yarrow is a hard-working and precise filter, an edge plant and gatekeeper. Yarrow aids in deciding what stays and what goes, and therefore is a particularly good ally to empaths. If you are often subject to the swirling energies around you, find yourself especially permeable, overly impacted by others, yarrow is a very meaningful and loyal companion. Yarrow's name, millefolium, 1,000 leaves, conjures the image of a tightly knitted green lace, and indeed, the work of this plant's magic weaves your blood and your spirit back into a fortified state. Our blood is the basis of all our physiology, as well as our genetic inheritance and ancestry. This is a thread that stitches all our lineages together. Yarrow speaks to the blood as an old friend and offers himself as a safety net. Resilient and undemanding, yarrow allows us to be ourselves, guarding us from feeling too much of what is outside of ourselves or out of our control. For those whose role in their community requires that they often hold space for the wounds and vulnerabilities of others, yarrow allows us to go deeper into this work of healing, supporting without being taxed and depleted from these exchanges. Yarrow can let us go further without the fear of going too far. The fear of losing ourselves can cause such caution that we end up with self-limiting beliefs and actions. Yarrow can lead us to the edge of our limitations and then beyond. Yarrow is also a renowned wound healer. It stitches our bleeding parts inside and out. It fights infections, staunches bleeding, tightens tissue, and regenerates. Allow yourself to become that green lace elegantly woven together. Allow yourself to be porous while knowing that you are discerning and filtering and safe. Again, that'll be in the resources for those of you who are curious about the deck. I just love it. So the next category is to socialize and connect. This is a big one. I think a lot of us have, alcohol kind of just completely tied in with our social life. So it's really hard to unhook some of those memories and experiences and our just general association and deeper belief about alcohol that we may think we need it to connect. We are so used to having it to connect. For me personally, I worked in food service for so long, and that's just the way everyone would hang out at the end of the day. Everyone would go and drink. So it really does take a lot of work to do something different than what everyone else is doing. So also just to applaud yourself for that, for not going with the herd and doing what's best for you and your body. So some tips on dealing with this aspect, and if this is a trigger for you, if being in social situations is a trigger for you, or if the desire to connect is a trigger for drinking. Obviously, first thing I mentioned here is reaching out for support and connection for those, for sober people, sober community, or for friends that may just not drink as much and are open to having experiences that don't revolve around alcohol with you. So this will retrain your brain to associate fun and connection to sobriety. The more sober experiences you have, the more true this will become. And at first it can sound like a very daunting and unrealistic idea. So connecting virtually also for when you're feeling lonely and isolated. And I think we can all relate to this, especially during this last year that we've had. Virtually or spiritually sending love to people and energies you're wanting to connect with. So they may not be there, but the energies that you want to connect with that are out there somewhere, sending energy to them, maybe writing letters to them, real letters, or, ones that you burn. send that way. So the herbs that really come to mind for this are herbs that help to open the heart, that help you be able to connect, but also herbs that are calmings that can support you if you're dealing with social anxiety, for example. So Hawthorne and Rose are two, they're in the same family actually. They're both in the rose family. They're both great for that open-heartedness. They work on the heart chakra. So for compassion, both to self and to other, connection to self and to other, and to staying open. Mimosa is an amazing herb for this feeling of deep isolation and loneliness. It's known as collective happiness bark in traditional Chinese medicine. The beginning part of the Latin name there is albizia, so you may see it called albizia as well. This is another way that I also use kava at times, is for the social anxiety. So having some of that on you when you go out. For example, they actually make a chocolate with kava in it. So that's a lovely alcohol-free way to have some kava on you. I'll put that in the resources if I can find it. They used to carry it at the herb shop that I worked at. It's delicious. Social anxiety and tension are the two things that I'm trying to target with the catnip and kava there. They're both very, very different herbs, but I think they could both work on the social anxiety and the tension in different ways. So the catnip, I think, helps when you're just feeling like you want to go inward a little more, you're feeling a little more withdrawn, and it could help you release tension so you can come out a little bit. And that's especially indicated when you tend to feel a tension in your gut. So like kind of like a knot in your stomach kind of anxiety. Damiana or lavender are more for the intimate connection. So releasing inhibitions and helping you feel more in your body. Also wanted to mention herbs that might help you celebrate. So I think we think a lot about the social aspect of drinking, and it's because we need to celebrate, right? We use alcohol in our culture to mourn and to grieve, and then also to celebrate. It's kind of this one size fits all, let's just throw alcohol at kind of thing. And I think there's a lot of ways we can use herbs to kind of recreate new and different rituals that are around celebration. So obviously beverages is an amazing way to start. You can make herbal mocktails, lots of recipes online for this, herbal sodas. So one thing that I like to do is boil a little bit of the herb with, so essentially make a tea and then let it cool and then mix that with some seltzer if you just want a completely sugar-free option, or you can make a simple syrup, an herbal simple syrup. So you boil the herbs with a little bit of water, and you could use maple syrup or honey, but those don't like high temperatures, so you have to go low and slow. Or you can just use sugar, and then you can boil it and let it cool, and then pour seltzer over that. So different ways that you can mix herbs into your celebrations that way. But I also think of herbal activities and crafts. Just if you are, let's say, a birthday party or something like that, instead of having everyone just sit around and drink, thinking about what activities you could do. And some of these activities could be interacting with nature a little bit. So making flower crowns, for example, or collecting leaves, making mandalas, making a group sculpture, that sort of thing. I think actually adults even do really like playing in this way and playing with plants, and sometimes they need somebody to be the person to suggest it. And the last, see how we're doing on time. The last category that we're going to talk about today is for energy. So this may be sound antithetical to some of you who drinks for energy. Well, actually, a lot of people do. So maybe some of you relate to this. So alcohol is a stimulant and a depressant, and we know it more as a depressant. That's how people talk about it more often. But it also converts to acetate in your body, which your body uses as fuel. So a lot of people will use it to kind of power through some activities they don't really want to do or are too exhausted to do. Maybe cooking dinner when you get home after you've had a long day, or getting through some chores. So if this is you, there's definitely some things to consider. One is that low energy after removing alcohol is normal for a period. So everybody's different. You're going to need time to recover and recuperate, even if you've just been using alcohol somewhat moderately. Your liver needs time to detox and repair. And a lot of times people will just need a lot of extra sleep. So definitely check in with a doctor, get blood work done, see if you may have any deficiencies, just to rule that out, that there isn't something deeper going on. So I mentioned that down below as well. Look at underlying reasons for the low energy, working with a practitioner. So as well as your regular doctor, you may want to work with, if it continues on, for a while, you may want to work with a naturopath or an herbalist and consider things like adrenal fatigue or burnout, thyroid dysfunction, low blood sugar instability in general. Blood sugar stability is actually really important in recovery. So just something that can help you to balance your energy and to reduce cravings for alcohol is to just make sure you're eating really regularly. So 3 meals a day and 2 snacks is the best for most people. Again, do what works best for you, but proteins and fats are often overlooked. So you're getting sometimes some carby meals and not enough of the proteins and fats. So just something to consider in your energy levels. So some things to do when you're feeling that low energy slump point in the day, if that tends to be a trigger for you, you may want to consider pumping yourself up by focusing on your intention, remembering your why, and maybe trying some movement. So I'm sorry, there's a typo there, but putting on some music and dancing like wild for 1 minute, doing shaking. So this can help to release tension in the body. It can also help to release trauma that's stuck in the body. So shaking the whole body, doing jumping jacks. Sometimes these big movements are too much if you are stuck in a certain type of stress response where it seems overwhelming to even do small amounts of movement. So if you're finding yourself there, what you're going to want to do is really small steps. It might be that the most you can do is go outside on the stoop and sit in the sun, and so do that. Don't do more than, bite off more than you can chew and put yourself back into a state of overwhelm. Really work with the energy that you have available and see what you can do there. Breath work for energy. Ego eradicator is a Kundalini yoga thing that some people like. I personally prefer the alternate nostril breathing, but I find if I'm feeling mentally depleted, if it's more that mental exhaustion, it can really serve as a reset and help to get through, the rest of the day, or especially work where you may need to be using your intellectual side a little bit. So for this category, the herbs that are going to be really supportive are adaptogens. So we talked about adaptogens earlier as herbs that help your body adjust to stress. They work on that HPA axis, so they help regulate your energy levels and your stress levels. So these are some that are actually a little more energizing. Eleuthero and Schizandra and cordyceps. So the Eleuthero, these are all ones that are going to help to give you energy, but are not the most delicious to just have in a tea. So you may want to work with powders, disguise the flavor in a beverage or in a small amount of water and shoot it back. Or the cordyceps you could buy as a powder and cook with it. I'll make sure to put in the resources, some sources for cordyceps because they're a little bit harder to find. The other thing to consider is the liver. So the liver is definitely going to be overburdened, right, if we've been drinking for a long time. So I recommend digestive bitters. This can help with your digestion, but also with clearing your liver. Milk thistle is a really great herb to help restore the liver and to really cleanse it. Dandelion root, as well as burdock. There's a lot of different roots, especially I think a lot of spring herbs that are great. And going into spring, it actually is a good time to cleanse the liver. You don't always want to do something more extreme, fast or anything like that at other times of the year, but some people can in the spring do a little bit more of that type of detoxing. Nettles is probably my favorite herb of this category just because it's so widely applicable. It's a very safe herb. It is safe during pregnancy. It's very mineral rich. You can prepare it as a tea with a little bit of vinegar, and that will help pull the minerals out. And it's basically like a herbal multivitamin. So it gives you energy for that reason. And it also works on the kidneys as well. So there's a bunch of other cues and triggers that we didn't get a chance to talk about today because I know that we are coming up against 7 o'clock right now. So if some of you have to jump off, I totally understand. If you can stay, we'll definitely do some Q&A and a little discussion if anyone has anything they want to share. But other cues and triggers, I'd be really curious to see what you all have experienced or what you all have seen. but I just wanted to mention some that we didn't get to talk about today. So there's so many visual cues. The visual cues to drink are incessant in our culture. So even if you've been sober for a long time, if you see an ad on TV or walk by a bar that has a sign out front, right? These are things that could be triggers even farther along in your sobriety. So we talked a lot today about using the cues and the triggers to redirect and create new habits. But another thing that's also completely valid is to avoid cues and triggers, right? We're not going to turn every cue and trigger into a new habit. Some we're going to just say, no, I'm going to walk a different way so I don't turn that, or I'm going to mute the commercial, like whatever can help you, or not go to that party, whatever it might be. So again, saying no when needed to protect yourself, completely legitimate. So some other cues that we didn't get a chance to talk about, the physical pain is a big one, because that's hard to treat with herbs, honestly. You know, you may need to, depending on what's causing the pain, work with another type of practitioner, a physical therapist or a cranial sacral therapist or acupuncturist. Another is conflict, anger, irritability, impatience, certain types of emotions that we may be taught we aren't supposed to feel, either because of, you know, our gender or other factors. Certain emotions have been repressed. And so when we stop drinking and we feel them, it can feel really uncomfortable. So I also mentioned here symptoms of PTSD, grief, the effects of oppression from living in marginalized bodies that you may experience, symptoms of an illness or symptoms of disability, the experience of disability, the emotional, physical, spiritual experience of either of those. Those are just some other things that, you know, I think could be triggers. So that's the end of my presentation for now. I'd love to hear what questions people have or any thoughts people want to share. This is the way we can stay in touch. I've got my 5 herbs for early sobriety is like a little freebie that goes a little bit more into some of the herbs we talked about today, especially I think rose and kava are on that. My Instagram, you can find me at Sober Spirals, and there's a link to my blog post here as well for herbs that can support your sober journey at the Alchemist Kitchen blog. Of course, feel free to email me if you have any questions or comments. I'm definitely open to feedback. I haven't taught on Zoom in maybe ever. So I was doing a lot of in-person workshops. So this is, you know, a new thing for me. So definitely open to feedback. And if you'd like to check out my website or see my coaching offerings, those are linked here as well. So thank you all so much for listening and being here. And yeah, just gonna check out the chat if, thank you, Rashina. I see you ended the sharing of my screen. So you're all probably seeing my face now. Did anyone have any questions or comments they wanted to address? Or Rashina, if any sent any in chat that I might have missed, you're also more than welcome to let me know there.
Yeah, I'm going to actually take myself off mute just to ask this question, but it was a good thing that came through, which is like, do you have any sort of remedies if people just really like the taste of alcohol? For example, like beer, you know? What are your recommendations for that?
I'm just trying to make sure I totally understand the question. So I don't understand the question, I guess.
Let me see.
So, okay, I think I'm starting to understand, but it's essentially saying that the person's sharing that they like the taste of alcohol. And so, yeah, I think I'm trying to unpack deeper though, you know, what is the craving that makes you think of it? You know, because there might be a lot of things we like, right? But we've decided for whatever reason that they don't work for us. There are aspects that we may like, but the overall picture doesn't work for us. So if you've made the decision that alcohol doesn't work for you and you do want to remove it from your life, so then we're looking at, yes, there are some positives, but the negatives outweigh the positives. So the real trick would be seeing, where is it that you're finding the craving come up? Is it the thought of the taste that is the trigger itself, you know? Or I'm not sure that I can think of an herb that would make you not like the taste of alcohol, right? So it would be more about noticing when that comes up. When do you have the thought, ooh, I like the taste of alcohol, or I miss it? What triggers that? I'm not sure if that's helpful because it's a bit of a tricky one. Let me know if there's any follow-up question that I can make that more helpful or more clear. Mm-hmm. I'm noticing the elaboration from Rashina in the chat. Yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes we aren't aware. It could be that there's no triggers. So I don't know, but I think sometimes we just aren't aware of what our cues and triggers are because we haven't, we live in such a normalized, alcohol is such a normalized thing in our culture. So we're so used to alcohol being a part of all these different facets of life. So we might not be identifying any of the cues within ourselves. We just see it so constantly outwardly that it's the norm. But if you start to change your ideas about alcohol and decide it's not the norm for you, then the whole world starts to feel like it's doing the opposite thing as you. And then I think sometimes you're able to notice more what are the things that make it harder for you and trigger you. Yeah. So I'm also seeing the question, any book recommendations? Yes. I mean, there are so many. There's a whole genre called Quit Lit, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. So Quit Lit is a big category, but I think there's two books that I put in the resources that helped me the most. So Annie Grace's work is really, really helpful because she helps a lot for people that struggle with the cognitive dissonance between, like I know alcohol is bad and for these reasons. I know it doesn't serve me, but it's like so necessary for me to socialize, or I need it. It helps me sleep, or it helps me with my anxiety, all these perceived benefit. It helps unpack those perceived benefits so that you can see it for what it is. And yeah, she basically teaches that you can know as many things as you want intellectually, and that doesn't change your behavior. So you have to go deeper than that and really change your beliefs on a deeper level. And her work definitely helps with that. So that would be my first recommendation is Annie Grace, Control Alcohol, This Naked Mind. I also recently read The Biology of Desire by Mark Lewis, and that's one of the most interesting books on addiction in general that I've read. I personally really like, reading about neuroscience and psychology. So if that doesn't interest you as much, you might want to go more into the direction of like memoirs, which are also amazing, and people's personal experiences. The Temper is a online publication that will have a lot of resources for books to read and things like that, because everything there is about, sober living and sober life. So even just searching in the search function, like books or reading, it will also tell you, lots of good lists of people to follow so that you've got a lot of sober inspiration that way. Yeah, so there's so many, but that's my short answer on that one. Yeah, I saw that Rita asked, what would you recommend as a first book? So I think in addition to what I just said, those are all there's a little bit of a empty place, I feel like, about the herbs and alcohol and sobriety like mixed together. I don't see a lot personally of books about that. They might exist, but I actually don't think I've ever read a book about, herbs and sobriety. So definitely the books that I previously mentioned for just general sobriety. I love Holly Whitaker's book, Quit Like a Woman, as well. But very few of those are touching on herbs and sobriety. I know the work of, okay, all of the, her brain just flew out of my mind because that's what happens sometimes when you're on Zoom. Does anyone have any other questions while I see if that person's name comes back into my mind? Or comments, or if anybody wants to share if they related to any of these triggers or if they have different ones and what has been their experience. If they feel comfortable sharing, feel free to jump in. Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a great suggestion. Forever mentioned in the chat. Time to start writing, right? Yeah, when you notice that the book doesn't exist, it's probably the book that needs to be written, right? And there's so many other ways that we didn't even get into about how herbs can support sobriety. So going like a whole class just about how herbs can support the liver or detox or symptoms of withdrawal or anything like that. So I'm just checking out the chat. Thank you all so much. Awesome. Hi, Lacey. And thank you for that, Lisa. I'll definitely check out your blog. That was awesome. All right. Well, we can wind down if there's no more questions or comments. I just wanted to give you all the opportunity to throw your voice into the room if you feel so inclined. But follow me on Sober Spirals if you want to stay in touch. Feel free to send me a message, DM me there, or via email, anna@junai.com. And you'll all get these resources so you can follow up with me there if you have questions. Yay. Thank you, everyone. I want to save the chat so I have all your comments to look at later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you, Alchemist Kitchen, and for having me, and to all of you for being here.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.